Good morning, YouTube. Out here on the porch this morning, enjoying the nice, cool, crisp morning we're having here. We're starting to get into a little bit of fall weather, even for Texas. But wanted to go over a comment or question rather in the comment section that I had from some people regarding how I got started in goats and just kind of the beginnings of it and some of the good and bad and the ugly, I think is how they phrased it. So anyhow, I'll just start off. I made some notes here and here, so I kind of cover everything, but I'll start with sort of the why, because I think that's maybe the most important piece to everything. And it was sort of a, one event or one idea led to the next in how I got here. And so, obviously, like a lot of people, I had a desire to be in ag and be a productive member of that area. And for me, that was, I wanted to run cattle. Always kind of enamored with that idea of having a cow herd or running cattle on a big landscape, and that's something that I've always kind of been drawn to. So. In my area, though, the way that cattle are ran, it's kind of a hobby situation. It's not something that people really make money with. So it forced me to really start to research and look around for, what would a guy need to do differently in order to be profitable with cattle. And so I went to the internet. And I honestly, a lot of it started just right here on YouTube, looking at different videos that were out there by people that were, talking about how they were doing things different. And eventually, I think I landed on some ranching for profit videos and learning about that. And eventually, I believe the first real book I read about this sort of thinking was Ranching for Profit, or it was Dave Pratt rather, and the book I think is like Healthy Land, Healthy Families, Healthy Farms, or something like. I can't remember the title of this book, but it's Dave Pratt that wrote the book, and that was maybe the first regenerative type book that I read, and started down that path of learning more about the managed intensive grazing and all those different attributes that it presents, and limiting, less feeding of hay, higher density grazing, all those types of ideas. And so as I went down that path, I realized that, you were certainly going to have to do things differently. And, when I started to have those revelations, I eventually got to the point where I read a book by Walt Davis, and he's a guy that did a lot of ranching in Texas, Oklahoma area, so kind of right here where I'm at. And one of the things that he talked about in his book was ranching with sheep and goats in addition to cattle. And so that was when the light bulb started to go on for me as far as what I should maybe be thinking about doing, and it was far enough away from the average of what is common in North Texas that I realized that there's a void here that I could be filling. And so when I started looking around me, I realized that, and this went along with the regenerative mindset of the resource in our area that people weren't utilizing was the brush. And it was actually a liability. It was a negative for a lot of people. And, some of them were even fighting it either actively or just, passively. They didn't want it on their place. And, whereas some people were actually mechanically and sometimes chemically fighting that brush and trying to rid their place of it to grow more grass. And so it was a liability rather than an asset that they were utilizing. And so when I was able to grasp that mindset, then I started to see a whole lot of opportunity right around me, in an area where I thought all the opportunity had been absorbed, that there was no vacancies to be filled in the form of idle land or land that could run livestock. All of a sudden, a lot of these properties were viable, and that really changed the game for me, as far as what I thought was possible. And so, that was kind of the course of thinking, for me, that got me to the point of, okay, I need to run goats. And so after that, um, I looked around at, started thinking of properties differently, and started looking around what was close to me. And I eventually realized what the appraisal website was for my county, which, that was something that nobody had told me about. I didn't know that was a way to figure out who owned what property, and basically was the point for me to be able to track down owners and contact them about trying to graze goats on their land. So that was something that I kind of had to figure out on my own and stumble across, in order to seek those properties out more so. So once I did that, then I was able to contact some people about property and visit with them. And rather, it allowed me just to figure out who owned it, and then I had to do another layer of research. It was owned by a trust or an LLC or some such thing, and so then you had to go and research that LLC, and figure out who what the ownership was on that LLC. So there's another level of research involved to really get to who owned it, and then find their contact information, a telephone number or an email or some such thing, to where you could even begin to solicit to them. So it was quite the process. So that's the why and the how on the land. I'll talk a little bit to production. I started small. I started with 45 head of goats, 45 nannies, and I'm glad I did that. The learning curve was steep, and I was glad that I didn't go and bite off a big chunk, because financially it would have hurt me really bad, with all the knowledge that I lacked as far as production goes, and just the steps of getting to some sort of consistent production. So, and I'm still doing that. I'm still there, but I'm a lot further along than what I was, obviously, than when I started. But starting small was something that I did, and I'm glad I did it. I didn't try to start at any kind of scale to begin with. So I would certainly suggest that to anybody out there who is starting out, to start at scale, small if possible. I would say that the biggest advance for me, once I got started, the biggest piece of knowledge that I obtained, and the biggest change that I made in my production after I got started, was the idea of a denser grazing, basically managed intensive grazing or rotational grazing, but not for the sake of the land necessarily. A lot of that stuff is focused on increasing forage, more uniform grazing, all that stuff, and it's good, and yeah, that's part of it. But for goats, I didn't recognize the importance of keeping those goats bunched together in a small area. This is grazing on pasture, mind you. How vital that was for a goat herd. I didn't understand that concept. And for a lot of people, it might not matter. They'll be on small acreages or whatever, and it won't be an issue for them, But if you're grazing on some sizable acres at all, turning those goats out on a big, 500 acre pasture is not a good idea. Like, you'll get hurt doing that. But keeping them bunched in smaller areas, from the predation standpoint, and simply from the goats are generally, they're not the greatest mothers. And some breeds are better than others, and I found that out too. But when you keep those goats in a small area and kind of force them to stay relatively close to another, you see a lot of benefits on the production side of things. And then because you're doing that, you have to move them regularly to avoid issues with parasites. But by bunching them up, then you achieve, you're able to always put those goats on fresh ground consistently and regularly throughout the year, so that the effects are compounding. But when I started out, I didn't realize the importance, mainly from a predation standpoint and a mothering standpoint, of forcing those goats to stay in a smaller area. They took better care of their kid goats when they were born. If they were less than an ideal mother, it was harder for them to walk off with the rest of the herd and leave those kid goats. That they were closer to them, where even if they did walk away from them for a little while, very soon the herd came back to that area. And so there was some mothering benefits there. And then the predation standpoint of having more guard dogs in a smaller area. Basically, number of acres per guard dog. You want that to be as small as you can get it, and those guard dogs can do a better job. And even more so, the brushier kind of country you're on. And so when I started out, I turned the goats out into just one big pasture, because at the time that's how my setup was, and I didn't have the knowledge or experience for subdividing with temporary fence with goats, and I paid the price on that. So that was a huge change for me, that I think if I hadn't made that, I wouldn't be running goats still today. So anyhow, I think that's enough talking for one of these videos, and I've got another question or two that maybe I'll dive into on a later video from the comments. But anyhow, like always, I enjoy making these videos, and look forward to the next one. Thanks for watching, guys. If you would, please subscribe and like. That helps us out a lot. But we'll talk to you on the next one. Bye.